Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If initially I could tell people that this meeting will be filmed and broadcast on the council's website, and if anybody doesn't want to actually appear on the filming, if they could please notify the clerk of the meeting, who's sitting on my left, and we'll make sure you're excluded. Okay, if we go into the meeting itself, apologies for absence.
Councillor Alan Darnay and Councillor Williamson as substitution.
Thank you very much indeed. Urgent business, I've not been notified of any urgent business. Declarations of interest, has anybody got any? Yes, Councillor Woodman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to declare an interest in the last application, 1A Lower Tunstead, because I used to be a member of the Parish Council's Planning Committee and supported the recommendation for approval from there. So I just want you to know about any biases I might have.
Thank you very much indeed. Public questions, I don't think we've received any. Minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Are we all agreed that they're a correct record? Agreed. Thank you. If we then now move on to applications, and we'll deal with the applications as they are printed on the sheet. And the first one is Land at Broadway, Green Business Park, Foxdenton, Chadderton, which is an application for an Aldi store. And I will ask the planning officers to present the proposal.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the late list. Since the Planning Committee report was published, we've received 2 further representations, objections. The first from Lidl and the second from Tesco. We have set out in summary what those objections contain, and we've also responded to them within the late list. There's also been some amendments to the proposed conditions on pages 4 and 5, so I'd just like to draw members' attention so you make sure that you have a look at those. Also on page 3, under the heading number of objections, it states at the time of writing the report 55 number of objections have been received. Following the additional representation, this takes a total to 57 representations. The last word is supposed to say objections as opposed to representations. I just wanted to draw members' attention to that. So I'll just move on to the presentation, and I'll just give you a quick rundown of the scheme. Okay. The scheme is a hybrid planning application comprising a full application for a new Aldi food store and an outline application, all matters reserved for a commercial unit to be used as a coffee shop, bakery or restaurant type facility. The application is being reported to committee because it is a major development. The application falls within the Foxdenton Business Employment Area, which is covered by Development Plan Policy 14, and the site forms part of the wider area, granted planning permission for a mixed-use development comprising employment uses and residential development in 2013. As part of that approval, the application site formed part of Phase C1 and was designated to deliver employment uses in either B1A or C, which is now under Class C, which is offices and light industrial, and or B2 and B8 uses, which is heavy industrial type uses, with the building of up to 16 metres in height, as approved by the approved parameters plan. The proposed development is a clear departure from Policy 14 and does not comply with the policy. In addition, the food store and commercial unit are out of centre for the purposes of retail planning policy. So on the screen there is a aerial view of the site, and that is the site boundary as well. The development will be surrounded by a mixture of uses, including residential development directly to the south, commercial development situated to the north, and a new linear park, when it is implemented, will be situated to the east. Turning to the proposed layout and specifically the food store, this will be situated on the eastern and southern boundaries. Car parking spaces with 120 spaces will be provided, and in terms of servicing and deliveries, this will be carried out on the southern elevation. Pedestrian access will be gained from 2 linkages, which are situated in the north and the west of the site, clearly marked on the plan in yellow. I don't know if members can see that. In terms of the commercial unit, The specific layout of this is a reserved matter and is not being considered as part of this application. The section plan on screen shows the relationship of the southern boundary to the properties on Cavalier Square adjacent. A number of representations have been raised which question the orientation of the Aldi store. A noise assessment was submitted with the application which considered the potential impacts of servicing and plant equipment in its current orientation as proposed. The noise assessment concluded, even without mitigation, that the development would have a low impact. Environmental Health have reviewed the application and have no objections on residential amenity grounds. As set out in the committee report, the applicant has voluntarily proposed some mitigation measures to help maintain residential amenity for those on the southern boundary, and these include: 1. An enhanced landscaping screen that will be delivered on the southern boundary, which will be maintained by the applicant. 2. A proposal for a 3-metre acoustic fence that will be implemented at the food store, details of which will be agreed with the council prior, so it will be attached as a condition. 3. Details of an appropriate lighting scheme, which will need to be agreed again with the council prior to implementation, which will be secured by way of condition. And 4. A restriction on delivery times for both the food store and the commercial unit, including no deliveries outside the hours of 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. Monday to Saturday and 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays. In relation to the commercial unit, a further noise assessment will be required when it is clear what the end use will be. If the site was used for a B2 or B8 use, i.e. heavy industrial, it would be difficult to restrict those types of uses to the servicing arrangements agreed as part of this application. Those types of uses are arguably more intensive and require a greater level of servicing, which can take place on a 24-hour basis. The design of the building has a contemporary appearance and will use a combination of black brickwork with anthracite and silver cladding panels, which complements the commercial uses that will be delivered north of the site. The building is 8 metres in height overall, which is significantly lower than the 16 metres approved in principle for the site in 2013. The submitted landscaping scheme shows the planting of 29 new trees across the site, with native hedge planting, shrub planting and wildflower. 13 of the new trees will be situated on the southern boundary between a development and the properties south of the site. In coming to a recommendation on this application, we have carefully considered the benefits and the harm as part of the planning balance exercise. The harmful aspects can be perceived as the development does not comply with Policy 14 and results in a loss of a small parcel of employment land, which includes a 3.1% take of the approved employment space granted for the overall site and a 1.3% take of the overall employment land allocated under Policy 4. 2. The food store application passes the retail sequential and impacts tests as confirmed by Nexus Planning. However, the scheme would result in trade being diverted from some centres such as Chadderton, albeit not to an extent considered to be significant adverse that would warrant a planning refusal. 3. A contribution of £12,800 will be required to implement a scoot at the traffic signals from Lydia Becker Way to Foxdenton Lane to help manage the potential for additional traffic on the highway network. The benefits of the scheme include the food store alone will create 40 to 50 full and part-time jobs, which as set out in the committee report is as many, if not more, than a development of the same scale for a B1, B2 or B8 use. Aldi will be working with the council to help create employment opportunities locally. 2. If the B2 and B8 uses were implemented at the site, these could involve heavy industrial 24-hour operations. In contrast, this application proposes a single-storey building restricted by condition limiting the hours of operation and servicing, and a commercial unit which will be subject to the same restrictions. Furthermore, the proposed food store building will be half the height of what is approved for the site. It is therefore considered that this proposal would likely have a lesser impact on nearby residents when compared to a B2 and or B8 industrial type use. 3. The proposal will play a crucial role in enhancing consumer choices in Chadderton, specifically on the Foxdenton site. The wider site has planning permission for 500 dwellings and a substantial amount of employment floor space. The proposed food store will not only provide for weekly food shops, but also convenience shopping throughout the week. The commercial unit could also provide for convenience food and drink uses for both residents and employees in the immediate area. 4. Both the food store and the commercial unit will deliver economic development in Chatterton. The proposed food store specifically will signal strong investment potential in the area and could help boost the local economy. For the reasons set out in the committee report, following a planning balance exercise, it is concluded that the benefits of the scheme outweigh the harm in this instance, and for that reason the development is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions of the officers' presentation? No? Okay then. If that's not the case, if we could go on to speakers, and initially we've got Mr. Mike Hollis, who's speaking against the application. Mr. Hollis, you'll be given 3 minutes, and just before the 3 minutes is up, you'll be notified. So start in your own time, please.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Mike Hollis. Thanks very much indeed for being given this opportunity to address you on my firm's policy-based objection to this application proposal. I'm not going to touch on matters of residential amenity because I believe they're being dealt with by ward councillors. My first point to you, therefore, is that the development plan is king, and by virtue of section 38(6) of the Act, the planning application must be determined by yourselves in accordance with that plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Therefore, given that your officers have concluded that there is conflict with Policy 14 and that they give significant weight to that conflict, the applicant's arguments in support are very much on the back foot, representing material considerations at a lower level. What is surprising, however, is that the officer report makes no mention of Policy 13 of the development plan. That was important in establishing the principle in Oldham that you were going to keep the best of the employment land and recycle the rest. In fact, it led to the deletion of 10 of the primary employment zones that used to be in the UDP. But there was one new business employment area created, and that was Fox Denton. And Fox Denton is very much the jewel in the crown in that arc of opportunities that stretches from the town centre and goes all the way around to Hollingwood on the policies map that will underpin the future prosperity of Oldham. So that the small quantitative loss referred to at 1.3% loss of land is very much dwarfed by the huge qualitative loss involving a use of land on your jewel in the crown. In fact, Fox Denton, unlike Hollingwood and any of the other business employment areas, allows only for B1, B2, B8 uses and for 25% residential. There's no allowance for subsidiary retail, leisure or food and drink uses. There is an exception policy incorporated in 14, but that would have required the applicant to have done one of three things. A marketing exercise, they didn't do it. A viability exercise, they didn't do it. Talk to the council about identifying regeneration areas and need investment, they didn't do it. The conflict with policies 13, 14 and 15 is clear. So what are the benefits or material considerations that weigh against that conflict? 5 identified in your officer's report. First, jobs. We say the net gain is very much less than the gross gain identified because of displacement and the fact that there is no growth in food expenditure. So it's shifting employment around, it's not creating net new gains. Fallback position of heavy industry, very unlikely in my view. Enhanced consumer choice, very well, but it's in the wrong location, out of centre. The government policy is to have the enhanced consumer choice within the town centre. Clawback of expenditure leakage, 3.45 million, over-exaggerated, say your own consultant, Nexus. And no benefit whatsoever to claw it back to an out-of-centre location unless there's consequential spin-off benefits for the town centre. Final benefit, the cross-funding or investment impact. Court of Appeal has held you can't use policy non-compliant arguments to cross-fund investments that doesn't comply with policy unless there are significant public benefits, and no such public benefits have identified. Haven't said anything of yet because of time on the town centre first policy, but there is conflict with policy 15. I would urge you to look again at the opportunities that we've identified on land to the rear of the Reform Club and at the former Jubilee Works. And in your overall planning balance, I really would urge you to take into account the impact on ASDA and the other food and service traders in the centres that need to feed into your planning balance sheet as a negative item, even if your officers and your consultants consider that those impacts are not significantly adverse. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Hollis? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Hollis. We now have speaking Mr. Adam Robinson, who's the agent for the developer. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm Adam Robson, Property Director with Aldi Stores. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The comprehensive report before you addresses the main issues and recommends our application for approval. So I don't want to duplicate officers' positive comments, but I do feel there are some matters which merit emphasis. Firstly, whilst we acknowledge that the food store may not have originally been envisaged for this employment site, the committee report concludes that in this case the benefits outweigh those of a traditional industrial use. For example, in terms of jobs, I can confirm that Aldi will create at least 40 new positions, and these will be targeted at local people, and we are already in early discussions with the Council's Get Oldham working programme. At Aldi, we are incredibly proud to pay our staff more than any other UK supermarket, which local applicants will benefit from. The second unit will also provide a range of jobs, whilst delivery of the scheme will maintain jobs in the construction industry, with an overall investment value from us of £5 million. It is therefore clear that the job creation and economic investment is reflective of the Council's objectives. I definitely don't want to say objections. The Council's objectives for locations such as Broadway Green, which are tasked with furthering the local economy. Providing a food store here will also be a benefit for the future operation of the business park. It will provide a focal point, generating activity and footfall and helping create an environment where people want to work and invest. Being a good neighbour is incredibly important to us, and we've worked hard with your officers to ensure that any potential residential amenity impacts are mitigated. This involves specialist acoustic fencing and landscaping along the boundary with properties to the south. Planning conditions will also carefully control our hours of operation and servicing, and I can confirm, and I'm pleased to confirm, that our application has received no objection from your environmental health officer. In terms of the second unit, I know there's been speculation locally that this might become a fast food restaurant. However, I can categorically state that this use has not been applied for, and a planning condition that will restrict the unit to the type that you would expect to see in a business park of this size at Broadway Green. Finally, I want to highlight that there are no outstanding objections to our application from any statutory consultees. It has been reviewed on the Council's behalf by a specialist retail policy advisor who has found the scheme to be acceptable, and it benefits from 127 representations of support from local people. We would therefore ask that members follow the officer's recommendation to approve this application. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Robson. Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Robson? No? Okay, we now ask the Ward Councillor, Councillor McLaren, to address the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Ward Councillors and also on behalf of the residents of Cavalier Square and the adjoining streets on the estate known as Fox Fields. The Ward Council has been contacted by a number of residents on the estate and have held several street meetings during the pandemic in order to discuss the application to develop an Aldi supermarket in very close proximity to their houses. Many stated that they would not have purchased their homes if they had been given any indication that such a proposal was in the offing. In the report to committee, much emphasis is placed on Policy 14. The Foxdenton site has provision for B1, B2 and B8 with up to 25% residential with no exception. However, it appears that there might be one exception in which it may be possible to depart from the policy, including the following. Exception C suggests that demonstrating that an alternative use would benefit the regeneration of an area in need of investment as identified by the Council and the community may be acceptable. Prior to this application being received by the Council, the community had not suggested that there was a need for a supermarket on Foxdenton. Many would prefer to see a much improved retail offer in Chatterton Town Centre. That said, there may eventually be scope for a small retail outlet up to, say, 500 square metres, for example, a sandwich shop serving light refreshments, etc., to the employees of the various commercial/industrial enterprises which will be developed on the Foxdenton site in the foreseeable future. This should not be on the proposed site for Aldi, but on the opposite side of Lydia Becker Way and integrated into existing and future planning proposals for commercial and industrial development. However, in order for the application to demonstrate the need for investment, it would need to be agreed by the Council in advance that the site is within an area in need of investment and that the proposal will benefit the community. This is not the case in respect of the Foxdenton site. Foxdenton is a key strategic site and has an important role in delivering both residential and commercial development in Oldham. It is apparent that this application does not meet the criteria for an exception to Policy 14. In other words, the proposed alternative use, that is retail, does not meet the criteria for exception as outlined under C mentioned earlier. It would need to be agreed with the Council in advance that the site is within an area in need of investment and that the proposal will benefit the community. Neither of these two aspects have been agreed with the Council. No marketing exercise or viability assessment has been submitted with this application. In simple terms, the application represents a breach of Policy 14. In a wider context, the committee are being asked to agree to surrender employment land whilst other potential employment sites in Oldham have been lost. It would be hard to justify surrendering employment land when the Council is also being asked to consider allocating or redesignating part of the green belt for employment purposes. The report also makes reference to the fact that the proposed Aldi development would create 40 to 50 new and part-time jobs. Whilst it may be possible to argue that employment opportunities are still being created, it is worth considering this in the context of employment as a whole. Given the current situation relating to the food retail market and the rising cost of living, it is probable that if Aldi attracts shoppers from elsewhere in Chatterton and beyond, and the market share of other retail expenditures should fall in real terms, jobs will be lost. In other words, it does not follow that there will be an overall increase in the level of employment, but simply a redistribution of existing employment opportunities. The Ward Councils have asked Davison and Young on behalf of Aldi to consider redesigning the site under Policy 20 to ensure that the loading bay is not directly behind the residential properties on Henrietta Square Cavalier Square and Henrietta Court. This suggestion has been ignored and the residents are faced with the prospect of loading and unloading taking place outside current proposed opening hours. Despite the intended presence of an acoustic fence and additional landscaping, this is likely to prove to be a source of disturbance, especially for those with young families. It can be argued that appropriate conditions may be attached to the application. However, if the application is approved, the residents will be faced with the need to continue to monitor such things as noise and light pollution, out-of-hours deliveries, fumes and odours. Aldi need to be encouraged to depart from their one-size-fits-all approach and take greater account of the impact of their retail units on the wider community. Some of the reasons offered in support of the proposal do not seem to be realistic. It will not necessarily reduce the carbon footprint or promote the green agenda, given that most residents will still have to travel to Chatterton Town Centre or elsewhere to complete other aspects of their shopping after visiting Aldi. In their response to the submission by Hollis Vinson on behalf of the residents, Nexus confirmed that Aldi would have a relatively narrow retail offer and residents would still have to visit the town centre to source other goods and services, although perhaps with less frequency or spend as much as such when they do visit. When the original application, PA 334-355-13, was considered, a Section 106 agreement was concluded which made reference to £150,000 being made available to support the introduction of public transport for up to 3 years along the Spine Road, now known as Lydia Becker Way. This facility is unlikely to be introduced before the residential, industrial and commercial elements have been more fully developed. However, it does help to illustrate the point that, for example, many elderly shoppers or those walking from South Chadderton will find access to Aldi is a challenge without available public transport or access to a taxi service or their own private car. Access to the town centre and elsewhere by public transport is available. It would suggest that some of those who have written in support of the proposal may not know the area particularly well. Assuming that this application is refused, there is a need to think more carefully about the future use of this part of the Foxdenton site. Given the proximity of the Redrow housing development, some further thought might need to be given to the outline planning considerations attached to any future development. No other part of the Foxdenton site has the same potential impact on residential development as does any development on this site. The size and nature of any future proposed development on this site, therefore, needs to be properly evaluated. The report also recognises that some food shopping journeys may be diverted from Asda and possibly other retailers. However, some residents would still need to visit the town centre to access other retail outlets and service providers. It would certainly help to reduce the carbon footprint if all small retail outlets and services were together in the town centre and could be accessed during, say, one shopping journey. It is likely, however, that visits to the town centre will become less frequent and the overall spend substantially reduced. On balance, it could be argued that there are strong grounds for refusing this application. In the light of some of the issues outlined in the report, the anger and frustration expressed by the residents of Cavalier Square appears to be justified. There is little merit in this application and much to be gained from considering the whole exercise from a different standpoint. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Does anybody have any questions of Councillor McLaren? Yes, sorry, Councillor Gloucester.
Good evening, Councillor. Can I just ask how far the next store of this type is away from this site? I can't work it out.
I think you're asking the nearest
How far away
nearest
the
supermarket
next store of
to
this
this
type
one, yes.
is, so a Lidl
I
or an Asda?
I think that's Lidl.
How far is
the
it
Lidl
from?
supermarket, which is what I think
it's just under a mile away in Jardine
Within the
Way.
report, it's just under a mile away.
So it is quite close, isn't it? I thought it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to talk about the retail impact assessment because that's just a technical exercise which I suspect rather cynically can prove whatever you want it to prove. So I want to concentrate on policy 14. So it's established beyond doubt that this proposal is not in accordance with policy 14. So the question is whether there are material considerations that outweigh the policy objections. One of the arguments advanced in favour of that is that this is only a small area of employment land, both on this site and in the borough as a whole. But I'm concerned that reliance on quantity doesn't actually deal with the issue of quality. We know that Oldham has a severe shortage of developable land. And we also know that because of our housing situation, a lot of our sites that are allocated for industry actually are being regarded as more suitable for residential development because many of those industrial sites are unattractive to modern developers, often because of access difficulties. In recent months, we've lost former employment land in Shaw and in Royton, and a allocated site in Diggle to housing development. And I'm not objecting to that, that was clearly right. But it does mean that our industrial land is constantly, or employment land is constantly being whittled away. So it's dangerous to draw conclusions about supply. And really we have to make a significant judgment about what development is contributing to Oldham's overall objectives of improving job prospects and opportunities to address the disadvantage that this town operates under. The land at Foxdenton was specifically identified for development to create opportunities for aspirational jobs and opportunities for residents on the basis that it was a large site with excellent access. When it became public knowledge, there was considerable commercial interest in that site. Now that didn't materialise because the site wasn't actually realistically available at that point. I'm concerned that we're now going to allow a non-employment use on this site at a very early stage in the site's development and in the middle of a pandemic which has presumably disrupted the investment market. I think this is particularly worrying when the borough, and this is the point that has been made by Councillor McCarran, that we're considering releasing land in my ward that's in the green belt in order to improve the quality supply of employment land. So the current recommendation and the stance in places for everyone are not consistent and don't represent a holistic application of planning strategy. The justification for non-compliance with policy doesn't seem convincing. Talking about job numbers doesn't again deal with the issue of quality jobs. I make no criticism of Aldi jobs. I know they are a good employer. But a shop job is not what we were talking about when we were talking about aspirational and quality jobs. And I don't regard that as a justification for the release of this land. Similarly, comparing the development with a hypothetical employment development is only hypothetical. And nor do I accept that providing a food store is justification, because again, that's contrary to our policy and our wish to upgrade. It will condemn Chadderton Town Centre to be in the second-rate centre forever. Will not allow us to do any improvement to the district centre. So I can't support this proposal. I'd like to recommend a refusal on the grounds that it's not in accordance with adopted policy and there are no material considerations that justify a departure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that proposal seconded at all? No, we don't have a seconder at this stage for that. Has anybody else got any comments? Yes, Councillor David.
Thanks, Chair. When the application was presented, we didn't have a dead lot of information on what Councillor Brownridge and McLaren and the points that they've just made about and like I say, supermarket jobs and Aldi are a good employer, but we didn't have much information on the reason why so-called better quality jobs aren't being looked at on the site, which was what the use was actually, supposed to be intended. So have we got any more information on that, why it can change to a different level of what was actually approved at the original planning stage?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I think the bottom line is we are being asked to consider the application before us. If you like, to put it in maybe a bit of a crude way, the offer on the table is that of what is before us tonight. To the best of my knowledge, there has been no proposals or other developers coming forward wanting to develop employment uses, by which we mean office or industrial warehousing kind of uses, on this plot of Foxdenton. So I think to say why that isn't happening, there could be very many reasons. The pandemic could be one, as Councillor Brownwood just said, but already before the pandemic, many sectors were declining that would ordinarily go on traditional employment land sites, and demand for office space was declining as an example as well, and that certainly has been impacted further by the pandemic. So I think I can't give you a complete answer to that in terms of why are they not before us now. The point is what is before us is what we have to assess. And while I understand Councillor Brownridge's point about comparing to a hypothetical employment situation, that same argument applies to the jobs as well. We're comparing the jobs to hypothetical jobs that don't actually exist at the moment. And so that is why I simply encourage you to look at what is here before us. Yes, the policy says what it says, and we've acknowledged in the report that this proposal is contrary to the adopted development plan. And so it is for this committee to consider, based upon what's in the report, are there sufficient material considerations to justify a departure from the development plan in this instance, based upon what is before us tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. It just really concerns me that we're already departing from policy, and this council does it time and time and time again. And I just really do not understand. Our policies are out of date. We depart from them at a whim. And I just, it's really difficult to assess applications like this simply because you can't read a policy that's we can actually use at the moment. And I just feel that anything can go through with this council because our policies are so out of date, and this is an absolute classic example, and it's just wrong, absolutely wrong.
Can I just clarify a point on that? It is a departure from the policy, and it doesn't comply with policy 14. But when you look at the creation of employment, what the site's actually seeking to achieve, the retail unit will create the same level, if not more, employment opportunities than what the uses were intended for the site. So whilst there is a departure in planning policy terms, on the ground it still will, it still will achieve employment opportunities as policy 14 would intend. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Davis.
Yeah, as I said, I'm kind of in two minds on this one. I think supermarkets are, they're good employers, and we need supermarkets. People moving in the houses would have a good a local shop they could walk to. But I'm still not convinced about the answer to my question, where it was supposed to be, without being, anything against supermarket jobs, that it was supposed to be quality jobs. I've not seen any reason why we shouldn't still not seek those quality jobs on the site. There doesn't seem to have been any effort or any kind of survey done of, have we made the efforts to get these jobs? Are them jobs there? Maybe they're not, and maybe we'd regret it if we did refuse this application. But like I said, I'm still open-minded on it.
Yeah, of course, that's not the prerogative of this committee. If I could bring the head of planning back, and then it'll be Councillor Brownridge.
Yeah, it's just to clarify as well in terms of what Councillor Gloucester was asking about in terms of a departure from policy and policies being out of date and what have you. I mean, first of all, I would challenge what you said in the sense of I don't believe we do, on a whim, depart from our adopted development plan. It's not that we do it all the time. However, we have to accept that the joint core strategy and development management policies, DPD, that we are using as our adopted development plan at the moment is 11 years old now. That is why we are embarking on a new local plan review to bring it up to date. A lot has changed in national planning policy-wise in those 11 years, and all of these different factors have to come to bear. So, yes, as we've acknowledged, this is a departure from policy 14. There can be reasons for that. That is why it's allowed in planning, the departure from the development plan. It's not an absolute that the development plan always has to be adhered to, because it is always about the merits of the individual application and the development before us. So I just want to clarify on that point for Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you. Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you, Chair. I think just following on from Councillor Davis' point, This site's really only coming to the market quite recently, so we don't actually know what interest there is out there for the jobs that we're calling quality jobs, which is probably rather offensive to Aldi, so perhaps we should come up with a better, because I really am not criticising Aldi, genuinely I'm not. But I do think there is a tendency in Oldham to panic and be so grateful that anybody wants to build something, we just say yes and we're not prepared to grit our teeth and hang on. And I just think we ought to hang on and just see what does materialise. And in terms, I do think it's disingenuous to argue that this meets employment policy because it creates jobs. If that was the case, then we wouldn't have a retail policy that says retail units should be set in established centres. It will be accepted that retail uses are acceptable as on employment sites because they create employment. They clearly do create employment. They clearly do not comply with employment policies. We've all agreed that because it's contrary to policy 14. So I just feel very strongly this is very early in the process to start making an exception to a very clearly established view of what Fox Denton was about. And one of the ways of getting around that policy was to say if you can demonstrate there's no interest in that use, you can have an alternative use. So there is an option there. If no employment use that we would regard as more appropriate comes forward, there's the opportunity for an exception to policy. I just maintain it's awfully early in the process to be saying let's make an exception to policy, particularly when the whole market at the moment is so uncertain. I think we should hold our nerve and hang fire and say this is not in accordance with policy. We are going to refuse it and review the position as time goes on. Thank you, Chair.
I appreciate what you say, Councillor Brownridge, and also you've moved refusal on the grounds that it doesn't comply with Article 14, but we have not got a seconder to that presently. So, Councillor Gloucester.
Can I ask Councillor Brownridge a question, please, as it's in her ward?
Sorry, this site's not in my ward.
All right,
no.
sorry. Can I ask... I'm just interested about this situation where there's another very similar supermarket only a mile away, and it was, I think I did hear earlier, less than a mile away. That is my biggest issue with this. We're just becoming overrun with these types of supermarkets, and I have absolutely no issue. I use Aldi, I use Lidl, but how many do we need? And within a mile of each other, I just think it really is. You know, we're going to end up in, you know, other areas where there's a Lidl, then an Aldi right next door to it. And we've got to look at how our businesses operate, because the more we have, the less there is, the less of a slice of cake there is for everybody. And I think that's really important, because in a few years' time, it's going to come to pass that they will not be financially viable. I'm absolutely certain. Sorry, so the question was, what is the ward councillor's view of the locations of these two if this went ahead?
Well, I think that we've, you know, it isn't it within our remit to ask ward councillors, apart from when there was an opportunity. And you have had the opportunity after Councillor McLaren spoke to ask him a question. And I think he clearly gave the view that he obviously opposed these proposals because he didn't want the impact, commercial impact, to be felt by other local supermarkets, including those within the Chatterton Centre. If I can bring the head of planning in again.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on these kind of points, because I think we have to understand, I mean, and again, this is one of the areas where national policy has evolved over the last 11 years since this core strategy was adopted. So first of all, going back to a point I think Councillor Brownridge was making about the type of employment, not the quality, as I stated, it is relevant to note, when this policy was adopted, we were talking about what we called B1, B2, B8 land uses office, industrial, warehousing. But since then, and very recently, the use classes have changed, and there's now an E-class commercial use which brings office into a class with the likes of retail and many other commercial business enterprises that create jobs. So that muddies the water a little bit compared to where we were in the core strategy 11 years ago. Likewise, in terms of the retail policy, national policy is now very clear that it is not for us to determine whether there is a need for retail. If a retailer wants to bring forward and believes they can make a business, if you like, out of a supermarket in a particular location, that is not for us to question. What we have to look at, and so in terms of what Councillor Gloucester was asking about there, it's not about whether there's other supermarkets nearby and the competition that creates. What we have to look at is there going to be a significant impact on other retails and other centres nearby, which from the evidence that before us is not the case, and are there sequentially preferable sites which will be closer to the centre or even in the centre. And again, from the evidence before us and the assessment that's been done, that is not the case in this situation. So while I appreciate and understand where councillors are coming from on the need argument, we have to be careful on that, because that's not something we're allowed to take into consideration, the need in that sense. I'm conscious as well, if I may, Chair, that we do have Richard Shepherd with us this evening from Nexus Planning. Nexus have been advising us on the retail aspects of this application. So if it's okay with you, Chair, if Richard would be able to add to anything I've said there.
If you'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, what I would say is that we've looked at this independently, provided objective advice to the Council. We've considered both the submission made by the applicant and the numerous representations made by objectors, including Hollis Vincent and MRPP, Martin Robeson Planning Practice. We are satisfied that the impacts arising from this proposal will be less than significant adverse. We have given particular consideration to the impacts arising in Chadderton Centre with reference to the Asda and its trading performance. We are satisfied that the Asda will continue to trade very well. As mentioned, and already reference has been made to the fact that Aldi has a relatively narrow offer. There is still a need to go into Chadderton to access other goods and services, and as a consequence of that, we believe that the proposal is compliant with national planning policy and your development plan in respect of its retail policies.
Thank you. Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this application is great, and I support it fully. I think lots of the young people in Chadderton will be pleased that the jobs are opening up for them in Aldi. And while I'm talking about young people, I dare say it won't take long for the driving instructors to take their students on there for lessons to practice the bay parking. So another car park in Chadderton, I'm sure, will be much appreciated by them. So I support this application and I'll propose approval.
Okay, we've got another speaker before I see if that is seconded. Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. I've been in two minds about this application, to be honest. I've been listening quite intently to the various discussions taking place. And based on the information that colleagues have mentioned, such as Councillor McLaren and Councillor Boundridge, I was actually going to second Councillor Boundridge's motion for dismissal, if that's still on the table.
Yeah, it was the original application, so we now have a full recommendation. Councillor Woodvine's wasn't seconded before you seconded, so now we've got a proposal to refuse this, and I think the basis for refusal was that it was contrary to section 14 of the district plan. And if I could ask that the particular comments and the particular objections robust enough. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Chair, obviously I usually say this just before you go to the vote. I don't know if that's what you're going to do just now, but obviously if you've been asked to vote against the officer recommendation, and you must be satisfied that you're doing so for valid planning reasons, because in the event of an appeal against the decision, you'll be expected to provide evidence to substantiate your reasons for refusal, and if you aren't able to provide satisfactory evidence of those reasons, then there's a risk that the council could have costs awarded against us for unreasonable behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody want to speak either for or against the proposal before we move to the vote? Yes, Councillor Hussain.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not speaking for or against the application at the moment because, like many of us around the chamber, I'm also double-minded. However, Councillor Brown raised an interesting question, and I don't know who has the answer to this, but how long has this site been on market, really? Because she mentioned that not enough time has been given to explore other avenues. So if there's an answer to that, that might put my mind at ease.
I will ask that, but I don't know whether that's a relevant planning issue.
It would be relevant if we were arguing that it is one of the exceptions under Policy 14, that it has been marketed and there's been no interest. But actually, that's not what we're putting forward in the committee report. In terms of the actual answer to your question, though, I don't know, to be honest with you, in terms of how long it's been on the market and available for. Obviously, the allocation was made 11 years ago, but I don't know when the owners of the site actually started marketing the site.
Is there no further comments? If not, we'll go to the vote. It's been moved that we refuse this application. Those in favour of refusal, please show. I get that. Eight against. Sorry, 8 for. Sorry about that. Those for the application or against refusal. That's 2, 3. Okay. And I am going to abstain on this. So the application is refused for the reasons outlined by Councillor Brownridge. If we now move on to the next application, which is, we're still in the same area and on adjacent site, and it's for commercial development on Lydia Becker Way, Chadderton, Foxdenton, Chadderton. And if I could ask the officers to outline the application.
Thank you, Chair. This application is being presented to Planning Committee because it is a major development. The scheme is a full application for 8 commercial units to be used for use classes B2 and B8 and Class E, G light industrial. As with the Aldi application, the site falls within the Foxdenton Business Employment Area and was also included in the 2013 Outline Planning Permission. As part of that Outline Planning Permission, the site was designated as being part of Phase C1 in the agreed phasing plan and was earmarked to deliver employment uses in either B1A or C, which is now Class E, B2 and or B8 use, with a maximum building height of 16 metres. A reserve matters application was submitted and approved at the site in April 2021 for the commercial and industrial development. Given that the proposal in this case is for employment uses, it follows the principles agreed for the site as part of the Outline Planning Permission and also complies with the uses intended for the business employment for the Foxdenton Business Employment Area as set out in Policy 14, and therefore the principle of development is considered as acceptable. As you can see, the site is currently vacant and is cleared in preparation for development. Directly to the south is a residential development undertaken by Red Row, which is Phase R2. To the east is Phase C1, Plot 1000, in which a development for a large commercial unit is due to commence this year. Looking at the layout, the scheme will be accessed off Lydia Becker Way. The development will be subdivided into 8 separate units. Units 5 to 8 will address the frontage of Lydia Becker Way. Unit 1 is the largest unit and will sit as a standalone building northwest of the access point, and Units 2 to 4 will sit behind Units 5 to 8. Each unit will have its own service yard and is arranged to include an assigned area of car parking and enough space for HGV access. Overall, the layout proposes 8 modestly sized industrial and commercial units which are compatible with the street scene, and as such the layout is considered as acceptable. As you can see from this slide, the development involves a diversion of a public right-of-way, which is path number 43. The proposal is to divert the route around the development, where it will then reconnect with the existing route north of the site. The diversion is required because the existing footpath, if left, as it would run very close to Unit 2, and this would present dangers to members of the public given the nature of the proposed end use as heavy industry. So the diversion is required to help maintain public safety, and no objections are raised to this. The appearance of the buildings will be coordinated in terms of materials with the same cladding finishes for all the buildings. The external materials will comprise a mixture of gull grey and merlin grey cladding, which is very common in these types of schemes. The materials will complement the materials agreed for the commercial building at Plot 1000, which is due to commence this year. Soft landscaping is proposed around the north, east, south and western boundaries of the site. The boundary treatments include a mixture of tree shrubs, native hedges and wildflower seeds. The Agriculture Officer and Greater Manchester Ecology Unit have reviewed the proposals and the planting schedule, and no objections have been raised. In conclusion, the principal development is considered acceptable and has already been established on the site. Whilst this is a standalone application, it should be noted that the scale and massing of the development proposed sits inside the parameters plan as approved as part of the outline planning permission for the site. The applicant will deliver a large amount of employment floor space to the site, which will create jobs in the area, and this was a significant benefit of the scheme, and with that considered, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions on the presentation? Councillor Surgeon.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, I don't know if I should ask this now or later, but in terms of on page 42 in your parking spaces, I've noticed there's no spaces are available for electric vehicle charging points. So I just wanted that clarified, and if I may, Chair, if this does go ahead, can I put a condition that there is at least one space available for electric vehicle for customers or for the staff members to, potentially use as well? Thank you.
I don't think there is any EV charging points. I mean, we haven't got a planning policy which stipulates there's a requirement for EV charging points, but I note your point, and I'm happy to speak to the applicant to see if they'll agree to that point.
Thank you, because I think as a borough, if I may, Chair, we've got a green agenda going on, and I think it'd be really pivotal to have something in place to show that we're not just talking about it, we're actually implementing it as well. So if you could go back to the applicant if this goes ahead, then that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can ask Martin to respond.
Yeah, sure. Just on the electric vehicle parking space point. Yes, as has been pointed out, there's no specific policy that would require it. The only thing we could really fall back on in terms of a justification for that approach would be the National Planning Policy Framework, more around the principles of sustainability. But I think it would be quite a weak justification for a condition. I mean, that could change going forward, but at the moment, with the policy position, that would be my view.
I think it's certainly something to be mindful of as we move forward into as local plan, to actually include elements of sustainability and such as things as charging points within it. But certainly I think that what's been given is that a commitment to go back to the developers to try to incorporate them in as a good policy really for their business, I think. Is there any further questions at all? No? We have a speaker, I think, on this. I don't know whether he's here. It's Mark Horton. No. Harrigan. No. Okay. So we don't have any speakers on this. Has anybody got any observations or comments they'd like to make? Contributions, Councillor Brownlee?
Yeah, in the light of my previous comments, as it is in accordance with policy, I'd like to move approval.
Second it.
Thank you. Councillor Davis seconds it. Is there any debate? No? Yes.
Just a bit of a shame really that it's not, we've just kicked one out and it could have been a retail and a business area, couldn't it? We kind of, quite a lot of customers for Aldi in that plot we're building there.
Yes, they would. Anyway, there we go. It's been moved and seconded that we approve this. All those in favour? Okay, thanks very much. That's you now. Move next to the development at Denbigh Drive, Shaw. And if I could ask the officers to present this.
Sorry, slight technical error there. Thank you, Chair. This application relates to land to the south of Denbigh Drive. It's at Planning Committee as it's a major development for the erection of 42 dwellings, including the creation of a new access, ancillary landscaping, car parking, highways works, drainage works and the associated. This slide notes the edge red of the application. The site is approximately 3.19 hectares of agricultural grassland allocated as other protected open land in the current local plan. However, it is noted it now forms part of a proposed strategic allocation named JPA 16 Cowlishaw in the emerging Places for Everyone joint development plan. Following the application of the agenda, this joint development plan, which is for 9 of the districts of Greater Manchester, has been submitted to the Secretary of State, and that was on the 14th of February. Looking at the site to the north, it is adjoined by an existing residential development. To the west/south, it's also adjoined by agricultural land, and to the east is a site of biological interest. The site has an existing access off Denbigh Drive, which you can see at the north there, and to the south you can see that it tails off to the southwest, and that denotes the land down to the public right-of-way. This aerial image is there just to give the members a greater impression of the site as you're considering it. The area you can see to the east and to the right of the photo of the image you're looking at is the SBI, and then obviously to the west and the south that's the other area of agricultural land, and to the north that is Denbigh Drive, which is the existing residential area we've discussed. This site outlines the proposed layout. Following consultation, we've had comments from GMEU raising concerns regarding the buffer with the SBI, which has just been outlined, and the removal of peat. Following that, there's been a reduction in numbers to 42 units and an increase of the buffer from the SBI to 10 metres. In addition, significant proactive work's been done by our highways section with the developer in relation to the internal layout to make sure it's acceptable and the access. So overall, this image shows in a colour-coded fashion that there are 6 different house types. There are 3 of each house type, 3 being for 3-bedroom properties and 3 being for 4-bedroom properties. The mix is 22 3-bedroom properties and 20 4-bedroom properties. This first slide just shows, just to give an indication of the 3 different house types, which are for 3 bedrooms, and then this one shows the house types proposed for the 4 bedrooms. This image is included as it shows proposed street scenes showing the mix of the house types across the development, and it also shows east to west an indication of the proposed levels. This is a cross section north to south of the site, showing the rise and fall of the site, and obviously the separation distances from the existing properties on Denbigh Drive. These images show the proposed access to the site on Denbigh Drive, just for reference to the members. These images show the site from the access. Obviously in the top images there, you can see on the far left, you can see the SBI land, and then in the central image, that's the view across the site towards the lower agricultural land that isn't part of the application site, and the one to the right on the top shows the view to the west. These images show the main interface distances and the neighbours associated with it, just to give an impression of obviously the boundary treatments they have. Finally, turning to the recommendation. As noted in the officer report, Oldham cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing land. Therefore, Policy 11 of the NPPF is engaged, which outlines the presumption in favour of sustainable development, unless adverse impacts of approving the development would significantly or demonstrably outweigh the benefits. When assessed against the policies in the national policy framework taken as a whole. The development's harm to the OPOL comprises of loss of openness. This is noted again in the officer report. Nevertheless, it is considered that the amended scheme incorporates measures to prevent harm to the SBI, and the proposed layout provides for outward views from the public domain over the remaining rest of the OPOL allocation. In addition, officers note that the environmental, economic and social benefits of the scheme outlined by the applicant amount to sustainable development in the context of the National Planning Policy Framework. Therefore, in weighing these considerations in the context of the utility balance, given the absence of a 5-year housing land supply, it is considered that the harm would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the inherent benefits of the scheme. As such, together with the mitigation to be secured through the imposition of conditions and a financial contribution towards the enhancement of existing open space within the locality, the application is before members with an officer recommendation of approval. And just to finalise, please can the members note that there are some items on the 8 list in relation to this case, which include additional representations which have been received following the publication of the report, some amendment to conditions following further negotiations with the applicant, an update to the method in securing the agreed financial contribution, and a minor drafting error by myself in the OPOL section, noting 44 units when it should be 42. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Has any member got any questions? Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask the planning officer, can you just show on the map itself exactly where the SBI is and how long it is? I'm just trying to get my head around that. Thank you.
So this area here that's light green with the dark green dots, that is the SBI, and then the area that denotes next to it is part of the buffer and the landscaping, part of the landscaping scheme which the applicant is going to implement to obviously enhance the area.
If I may, Chair, can I just clarify? So there won't actually be homes built on the SBI itself. Is that correct?
That is totally correct. Originally, the applicant has always been aware of the SBI and has made sure that when they originally applied there was a buffer. However, the buffer, when considered by the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, wasn't considered to be enough. It was, off memory, it was a 5 metre buffer. However, it's now at a 10 metre buffer, and the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit has considered that and the landscaping, and considered that it's acceptable subject to conditions in relation to the management of the site and the protection of it during the works, and then the management of the landscaping and the SBI following it, which off memory I think it's conditions 15 and 16 I think, but I can double check that for you.
Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just slightly confused, which is not unusual in fairness. So this is contrary to Opal, and we know that Opal is now a bit of a historic issue, so that's a bit perhaps not such a major objection, although obviously it is to local residents. I think my concern's about places for everyone. So we accept that this is in the very early incarnation. So though it's allocated as a strategic site in that document, it isn't a strategic site yet because that document's not been approved. So the text of the report says that even then, this proposal doesn't actually comply with the policies in places for everyone, which talk about having some sort of master plan for the wider area. So I'm just slightly concerned that we are preempting the space of places for everyone policy, but we're also watering it down because we're not having the comprehensive master plan that strategy needs. And whilst I understand the fact we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply as a material consideration, I'm just a bit worried about picking away at strategic sites before they've been fully considered, whether that again is a sort of a coherent policy, planning way of handling things. And I know you're going to tell me the National Planning Policy Framework lets developers do what they like, although I'm sure you won't phrase it like that. But I am just concerned that it's sort of picking away at a strategic overview of how Greater Manchester and Oldham should be developed. And you water down that strategic overview if these applications come in on strategic sites, but in a piecemeal fashion. And I'd just like some reassurance, really, that that's not going to be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brownridge. I think you make a perfectly fair and reasonable point. I think just to clarify the situation, so yes, under the current adopted development plan, this is other protected open land. However, the Places for Everyone joint plan has now been submitted for examination. That increases the weight that we can start to apply to policies in Places for Everyone, but that has to be subject to the level of objection to allocations and policies in it. So from a strict point of view, the weight is still fairly limited. However, I think it's worth recognising that from an Oldham Council point of view, we have already, if you like, agreed the principle that this area should be developed for housing by allowing this allocation to go into the Places for Everyone and approving Places for Everyone to go to first the publication, consultation and then submission. So while in strict planning policy terms it is not in accordance with the development plan, we as a council have accepted the principle of housing on this site, and we should start to give that a bit of weight. I think to the point of the Places for Everyone policy, as you say, Councillor Brownridge, does refer to having a comprehensive master plan, I think on virtually every allocation that it lists. I would agree with that in most normal circumstances. I think the situation on Cowlshire is a little bit different, simply because we have already granted permission for half of the Cowlshire allocation to be developed, as per the application that was before us at the last committee. And so it's almost like a master plan will be too late now. However, what has come into consideration as we consider this application and the Cowlshire Abattoir application previously, is to ensure that the likes of the SPI is protected, that there is plenty of open space and green infrastructure running through the sites, which is what we would want to ensure through a master plan, and that from the highways point of view, we are satisfied that there is suitable and appropriate connections into the site from both sides, in this case from Denbigh Drive, from Cowlshire, from a different road. So, yeah, in a perfect world, you're quite right, Councillor Brownridge, and we would have preferred to do a master plan first. But with our five-year housing land supply position and the fact that we already approved the Cowlshire Abattoir site, I think we've set a precedent on this site, if you like, that it would be somewhat unreasonable to, on the basis of not having a master plan, to now refuse this application.
Is there any?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Councillor Brownridge just said, but just got slight concerns with the amount of times that this application has changed, and it just appears that we've gone from around about 59 to 50 to 44 and then 42, and then from 44 to 42 without even asking residents what they think about it. And I think that's appalling, actually, because the residents are the ones that are going to suffer. They're going to suffer with the access. But I want to just ask you, how many times has, I've already mentioned that the change in numbers, but how many times have you met with the Miller Homes people to discuss this application? Because it appears that you've had your meetings with them, but you haven't actually been forthcoming with the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. In relation to your statement regarding the numbers, the original number was 50, and then it's 44, now it's 42. And during that time, obviously there's been a full public consultation at the beginning, and comments have come forward, not only from the objectors, but also from consultees. Those comments have been fed back to the applicant, and they've looked to address the comments as best they can, obviously in line with bringing forward development on the site. So, as part of the planning process, the government requires in the planning officer practice guide that planning officers are proactive in engaging with developers and bringing forward development in a proactive manner, and advises us to engage with developers as we do on all our applications. So I can't put a number on how many times I've discussed the scheme with Miller Homes, but we have met several times, and we have worked very hard as officers, myself and the people above there, to get the best possible development for Oldham in this case. In regards to public consultation, we have met the requirements of the council's statement of community involvement in terms of advising neighbours when significant amendments have been received. So as part of the process, they were re-notified on when there was a major jump in terms of numbers and a major adjustment in terms of the layout. Obviously there's a smaller reduction in terms of 40 to 42, and that's why, given that it's planning gain and given that it's not significantly different overall in terms of like access and properties, it isn't required that the public consultation is redone, and that's why there was only 2 lots of public consultation undertaken.
Sorry?
Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
So does that allow you to put a notice on a lamp pole that doesn't have a date on it? Because that's what's happened with this, and that's what has caused residents to be up in arms, because they feel that this is a done deal when it shouldn't be a done deal. It should be, like Councillor Brownridge said, we should be looking at Opal. You're building on Opal when all's said and done. And it's not because of Cowlshire, it's because of Knoll Lane and Haven Lane. That's what you did first.
Please, could you ask a question, Councillor Williamson?
Why wasn't a date put on the notice?
Thank you.
So the date on the notice was my error, and I apologise to the resident who sat before us and is going to speak regarding to that. Was there within 24 hours or so, maybe the day after is a bit longer, but there to rectify that problem. But not only has the application been advised by a notice on a lamppost, which is a requirement, a site notice is a requirement as part of our statement of community involvement, it's also the letters have been sent out to adjoining neighbours and a press notice has been done, which meets all the requirements of publication of an application, the same as any other major application that this committee is heard before. Again, I can only make an apology. It was an error to not put the date on. However, it's not influenced the decision making. And in regards to it being a done deal, whilst obviously that saddens me as a representative of the council, that's how the residents feel, I can assure you that this application has been considered on its own merits, as outlined in the officer report, and it's my recommendation to this committee that makes the final decision that on the basis of the information provided by the applicant, that it meets the requirements of the National Planning Policy Framework to be sustainable development and warrant a recommendation of approval.
Thank you. Is there any further question? Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, and I think I already know the answer, but do we do any sort of financial viability assessment on developments? Because just as an example, the Moss Hay development, the site came to a halt back well before winter, and it sat all winter with absolutely no progress on it. No roofs on the houses or anything. They're pretty much up, but they're open to the weather. So it's just a question in that planning preparation stage. Do we check that the builder is able to complete processes, or are you just going to tell me that's not a planning consideration, which I think is the answer?
So I think there's two different things there. So do we check whether builders are able, financially able to do what they do? No, that's not something that we can do as a planning authority. If you like, anyone applying for permission for a development, they don't have to show that they've got the financial wherewithal to do it. It's just a planning permission on paper, if you like, and then they may even sell the land on, of course, and someone else will then develop it who has the wherewithal. But in terms of financial viability, yes. So it's certainly an application like this, where the full policy requirements are not being met for things like affordable housing or open space or education contributions and so forth, we require the applicant to put in a full financial viability of the development to show why they can't afford, or why this development can't afford to do all the policy requirements, and then we independently verify that with our own financial viability consultants. So in this case, that's what's happened with this application, and that's why, well, in actual fact, what the applicant is offering of £100,000 towards public open space is actually a bit more than what the viability assessment said they could afford. So they've gone a little bit beyond what they could have asked for, but it is less than the full policy requirements, because unfortunately in Oldham, a lot of the sites we do come across do have viability challenges, and they can't often do the full policy requirements.
Thank you, and I think that's alluded to as well within the report. Any further questions of officers before we go on to speakers? No? If not, if I could ask Mr. Alan Reid to contribute. Mr. Reid, you have 3 minutes and you'll be notified just before the 3 minutes are up.
Good evening. The application shows 151 objections against only 5 in favour. How can you ignore the people who live here? All the fancy reports being created by strangers with click box spreadsheets. They don't know what it's like to live here. These are our homes. We live here. We care what happens. What's being proposed is destruction, not construction. New aspirational houses in a cul-de-sac development overshadowing 1960s bungalows on opal ground as well. I have to question the soundness of this application. In Miller Homes' own document, called Denbigh Road, by the way, not Drive, they state access is constrained and limited. 42 aspirational homes will bring at least 80 cars. The access is barely wide enough for 2 cars side by side. What will happen when emergency services attend? The pavements across the estate are trip hazards due to poor maintenance and subsidence. This 1960s estate was not built for modern traffic volumes and ownership. Legal parking is impossible. Because we have illegal parking at the top, children have been injured, non-local traffic uses the estate. Because of the illegal parking, buggies, prams and mobility scooters have to use the roads. Your report says no major impact is expected. Live here, as we do, and you will see another tick box. Report has been created. The document called Adoptable Roads shows Denbigh as a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. It does not. That's a second inaccuracy, plus together with the planning errors as well. Turning to the narrow and inadequate access between Irene's home at 33 and mine at 35. Number 35 and 37 were built as semi-detached bungalows. They suffered catastrophic subsidence and were demolished. Our home at number 35 is now a fully detached bungalow on a concrete raft. 3 years ago, Irene's brick porch became detached from her home and was replaced. There are properties at the bottom of Denbigh with non-tiled roofs and lightweight straw internal walls. The pavements in particular show signs of subsidence. Garden walls are cracked. They're not vertical, and directly at the access point there are 2 potholes that constantly grow. The telecom inspection hatch at the end of my drive fills with rising water. Neighbours have pumps running constantly in their subfloor space due to natural watercourses. The levels document shows the contours of the site. The detail stops at the northern edge, so there's no detail of the land underneath our homes. No consideration has been given to the effect of building on the site that's at the bottom of a hill. There's a near 30-metre height difference between the access point and Rochdale Road. Water is collected in the sponge at the proposed building site. Changes to the sponge will affect our homes. Where's the due diligence? At the southwest corner is the source of the River Irk with the 2 sewers that take the effluent from their site and across from Cowleyshore. They both leak. The Cowleyshore sewer erupts following even moderate rainfall. The farmer of 40 years has vaccination problems and illnesses in his herds. Who's going to make this area safe for us? There's a public footpath and therefore wider population. Must be resolved before consideration.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Gloucester?
Yeah, did you mention something about a sewer leak in there? Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well.
Yes, I did. I have here reports going back 20 years, which I've been provided with. Words like, it seems that the sewer is inadequate on peak flows. I'm no engineer. However, if I can just read just one little thing here. North West Water, now United Utilities Limited, in 1994 the Water Authority informed the farmer that it intended to renew the sewer. This is the one that crosses from Cowleyshore. But the work was never done. In 1998 a further sewer, known as Longfield Road Sewer, was joined to the existing sewer near a manhole which is named. The plan shows these manholes to be of an entry type, although they externally appear to be top. The point is that the whole sewerage in that area is under extreme duress, very strong pressure. I have seen water erupting from the sewers from the Cowleyshore. And if we've got 250 new houses at Cowleyshore, where's their sewage and effluent going to go? Is it going to come our way? Is it going to make it even worse? What about the infection in the contaminated land down there? That contaminates and it flows into the River Irk. I have also walked the length of the site along the sewers as far as the Royton Old Sewerage Farm and seen evidence there of overspill flowing into the River Irk further down. We have the contamination which has caused these cattle over not just 2 years but 40 years where they've had to be vaccinated permanently so that they can survive the diseases which again are noted in this report.
Can I just come back on that, Chair, please? So where in relation to this site are those sewers, do you know?
Absolutely I do. If you look at the site there, that finger going down to the southwest point, thank you, where the marker is virtually the source of the River Irk. And just literally a little bit further to the south, there is a sewer that comes across from Cowleyshore, and a little bit further to the north, there is the sewerage which comes from the Netherhouse State approach.
Could I ask the officer to outline what the drainage arrangements are on site?
As part of the application, the applicant has provided a flood risk assessment and also a drainage layout which you've commented on. United Utilities have seen those documents as well as our drainage section and the local flood authority. The findings of those assessments have been accepted in principle, and it's noted that UU have recommended a condition imposing them, and it states in the report on the basis they've recommended the imposition of the condition requiring these details be carried out on site, and no surface water will be permitted to be drained directly or indirectly into the public sewer. It's noted that the drainage strategy includes an attenuation pond on site. Given those details have been assessed by the appropriate qualified consultees, and there's been no reason to raise objection to them, officers consider that the matter is acceptable.
Peter.
Just to add to what Mr Taylor was saying as well, just to clarify that when we consider a development proposal before us, we cannot require that development to fix existing issues. So if there have been instances of sewers overtopping and what have you in the area, this development, we can't make them fix that issue. All we have to look at is, will it make the situation worse? Now, from what Mr Raters has said, it sounds as though when those instances have happened, it's been due to heavy rainfall. So in terms of what Matthew's just said, the condition saying that no surface water will be allowed to go directly or indirectly into the public sewer means it will not be adding to that situation where, if there's heavy rainfall, it causes a sewer to overtop. I just want to make that really clear, because drainage is very complicated, but that is an important point, that we can't require the developer to fix the existing issues as long as they don't make it worse.
Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, you sort of touched on, I think it was access or something like that. Can you just explain what difference that, and the officer, the planning officer explained a bit about it, what that access point is like and what it will do with the 80 cars that are going to come on? Because I think it's just between two houses, and I think it's on a bit of a bend. So I just wondered whether you can explain what that's going to have issues for your properties, Irene's as well, Irene Walker's as well.
Yes, thank you. I wonder if I could just ask for the pictures of the four houses to be put back on the screen. Okay, so there, bottom right-hand corner, you have got a measure of the width of the actual access point. And as I said, our main concern there is because the land is so soft, it is so poor. The house on the right, which is my house, is the one that collapsed and had to be completely rebuilt. So having that access there being as narrow as it is going to mean at least 80 new vehicles coming up there. There's going to be the vibration, there's going to be the noise, there's going to be the pollution as well, until such a time as electric vehicles are the norm. But it is just going to be very, very disruptive. It's going to be very, very noisy. You'll also notice there is a corner, there's a slope going up to the left on the top left-hand corner. So coming down, the only way access will be, it will be from the left-hand side of the photograph, top left-hand corner, and turning into Denbigh Drive. So we're going to have the headlights as well, heavy vehicles, very, very weak land. I'm very concerned that it's going to cause severe structural damage to the properties directly either side of that very, very narrow access way. And it is a major concern that we have got these aspirational houses which are at the very end of a 1960s housing estate, and the rest of the driveways and the roads on this lower part of the estate are just not fit for purpose. They are not adequate to provide traffic flow, and if people were to park legally, then the whole of Denbigh Drive would be a complete no-go area.
Could I ask the highway officer to possibly address the issue?
Okay, so we've worked incredibly closely with the developer on this one to make sure that we were happy with, as the local highway authority, with the access. Because as it was presented to us at first, we weren't. We now are. because we've got an adequate width of carriageway and footway. This is for normal domestic traffic, and I'll go through the expected traffic flows in a moment. We've got a condition in also so that we've got our access which is acceptable. We've got pedestrian and vehicular access, and the additional condition will involve a highway improvement scheme on Denbigh Drive, not the access road, at the access, just to highlight the presence of the access. So we're working all the time to slow traffic down, which I understand it is already because of the existing highway layout and because of the parked vehicles. The expected vehicular movements, when we receive the application for 50 dwellings, that's the threshold for where we ask for a transport assessment. So we want to know what's happening now and the effect of the development. If it was for 42, if they'd put the application in for 42, they wouldn't even have had to provide a transport assessment unless I had a particular worry and then I asked for more information. So I just need to put that into the context of how much traffic will be generated. So before the modal split data, which is how people travel to work, was applied, using the TRICS database, during the morning peak, which is between 8 and 9 o'clock, there were 47 expected two-way movements from the development, to and from the development, not the existing traffic on the estate. And between 5 and 6 o'clock, 42 two-way movements. And because it's near the school, I'll tell you the movements between 3 and 4 is expected to be 38 additional movements. When we apply, or when they applied the journey to work modal split, so that some people drive, some people walk, some people cycle, during the morning peak it's 34 expected two-way trips and 31 in the evening peak. So we've just got to put that into perspective, and as the head of planning said earlier, what I have to consider is the effect of the development on the local highway network, and we can only recommend refusal for highway safety reasons when there's a severe impact expected. And given what we know about how developments do actually operate and the figures that we're given here, there were no grounds for refusal on highway safety reasons.
Sorry, Chair, mine is actually just a question for the highways officer. Can I ask, how many cars per household does the TRICS database work on, or is it, you know what I'm asking, don't you?
I can't answer that question directly because that information isn't what's given, but what's given is the expected number of trips, a particular house size in a particular location in a particular town. So when they apply it to a town like Oldham, they'd look at, and we can interrogate this, we can question it, and we can say, well, we don't think you've quite got that right, do it again if we want to. So they'll look at, in this instance, it would be edge of town location as opposed to town centre, so they know they'll need their car a little bit more. The family housing type as opposed to an apartment, and then countrywide and in similar towns to ours, we can see that if you are a family of 4 and you live in a 4-bedroom semi-detached or 3-bedroom semi-detached house in this sort of location, you're likely to do that many trips per day. So that's where we get the figure from, so that not everybody leaves, so you won't get 80 cars leaving at 8 o'clock every morning. They expect there to be 34 coming and going during that hour, which is actually less than less than 2, it's 2 per minute. No, it's not. I've completely lost it there. Just a second, just a second. One every 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes, one
Can
every
I
2
just
minutes.
ask as well? So your head starts buzzing, doesn't it? But so, for example, a 4-bedroomed house of this nature, they're going to be reasonably sized. So let's say, for example, it's like my household. I've got 2 children, adult children. They're both in relationships and they don't currently.
I think yes, but I think we are straying. We
are. I'm asking the highways officer a question.
We're currently asking questions of the presenter.
I'm asking the highways officer a question as she has responded to the resident, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm quite within my rights to do that.
Are you?
Yeah, I am.
I think that the officer has answered your question.
Well, you don't know what the question is.
All right then, go on. Carry
So,
on.
for example, where there would actually be 6 people in a household, because obviously there could actually be 8 quite reasonably. Is that ever taken into account, or is it all done on one sort of logarithm that works it out?
So, in a 4-bedroom property, for instance, it wouldn't be, well, there are 4 people living there on the TRICS database. It would be an assumption of the type of movements that type and size of house would generate. So it could be that 8 people live there, or 6 people live there, or 1 person lives there. So it's very general, and it's only a forecast. It's never, I do try and say this, it's never there will be 34 two-way trips. We sort of expect there to be that sort of range, yeah.
Right. If we could move on then to the next presenter, who's Nicola Burns, who's speaking on behalf of the agent.
Thank you, Chair. Miller Homes have been through a very thorough planning process on this application. To let everybody aware of the timeline that we followed, we started a pre-app process in February 2020. We followed that with a very thorough public consultation event that also was online, as well as drops. And we then submitted a full application in March last year. This process has been going on now for 2 years, and what is presented to you today is hard work between ourselves and the council and various consultees. Miller are proposing 42 high-quality 3 to 4 bedroomed houses, and these houses are also designed to nationally described space standards. They have ample parking and private amenity space. The development itself is designed to respond to the existing features and sensitivities of the site. All open spaces are directly overlooked by housing, which in turn will help to create a safe environment, as well as protect the SBI on the site, which has been discussed previously along the eastern boundary. Connectivity has been looked at. We're including a footpath running from north to south to connect into the public right-of-way to the southernmost edge of the development. The majority of the housing is detached. It's therefore appropriate for location and responds well to the environment with a softer edge and not a hard edge of development. There is a 10-metre buffer zone that we agreed with the Greater Manchester Ecological Unit to the site of biological interest to the east with additional landscaping. And in terms of principle of development, whilst the site is identified as other protected open land in the core strategy, the site has more recently been identified by the council, as we discussed on before, as a preferred housing allocation in Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, or also known as Places for Everyone. This draft allocation confirms the site is suitable for delivering much needed housing. It lies in a location identified for new homes, and the opportunity must be taken to capitalise on this, so it can best meet identified needs in the area. The principle of development, as touched on before, in regards to bringing the development forward, has also been reinforced by the fact that a scheme has been approved to the south for 201 homes. This also falls under the same requirement of places for everyone and the draft housing allocation, and the same principles also apply to both sites. This therefore demonstrates the site is suitable for housing development and forms a logical continuation of that development within the draft allocation. Oldham does not have a 5-year housing supply, and this must be brought forward and developments like this in order to meet these needs. The key benefits have been identified through the report, including delivery of new housing to help the supply of housing needed for the Borough to help protect the site of biological interest, provide a £100,000 contribution towards enhancements of open space, and it will also provide opportunities for job creation, including providing local employment and training opportunities. As concluded by the officer, there is a clear and convincing justification for the scheme in order to supply a development that will meet a housing need and also meet with national policy. We thank you for your time and we hope you will follow the recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Williamson.
Thank you. How do you propose to safeguard the structural integrity of the existing properties with your properties throughout Denbigh Drive, not just on that bit of Denbigh Drive itself? Is my first question, and I have another.
We can, at the moment, we don't believe there's any need for that. However, we can do things like provide monitoring equipment, which would normally be provided if a development was looking at something like, I'm sure as other people are familiar with, a piled solution, but we don't have piling proposed on this site, so we don't actually believe that there will be any excess vibration that would cause any issues. However, normally through a development, we would aim to have constant dialogue with neighbours to try and address any concerns. And so we would look to engage with the neighbours on a regular basis. And we would also look to engage with neighbours to let them aware of all activities that are going on the site. If there's any changes in traffic movements and such like, we would notify neighbours of any of those types of activities.
So is that a promise then that that's what you do?
As part of the application, we have to submit a construction management plan. It's actually one of the listed conditions. I'm sure Matthew's got the reference there. That details that we have to provide information in regards to traffic movements, sort of in peak times, what those traffic movements are likely to be. So for argument's sake, I'm sure the council and the neighbours in the local area will be asked to avoid having things like deliveries. In school term, we'll be asked to avoid having deliveries or heavy goods during peak times of the day, so in rush hour in the morning or at the end of the day. So we have to agree. Our traffic management for that site has to be agreed with the council, and there's actually a very thorough condition that deals with that.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? So you're telling me that we have to have our deliveries done so that it's convenient for you rather than convenient for us?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
I think what was being said was that usually for a site like this, that the council, and as part of the conditions that we're looking at tonight, will have a site management plan that will actually organise and direct the developer to appropriate use of the site and appropriate deliveries. I don't know whether you want to make any comment on that.
Sorry, but I was asking that question to Miller Holmes's rep, and surely she can answer that question for me, not you.
Certainly she can, but she's already...
You're surmising here. What you should be doing is allowing this lady to speak, please.
I understood what she replied to you before was that she would work, or Miller Holmes would work with the council to the site management plan that was agreed with the council as part of the conditions. But certainly if she wants to contribute any more, that's fine.
No, that's it. We've got a very thorough detailed condition, and we will have to agree all traffic movements with the planners.
My second point would be Mrs. Walker and Mr. and Mrs. Ray are the most directly affected. As you've heard, their houses have dropped through subsidence, and they've had to have the house that Mr. Ray is in is a double property because of that. Mrs. Walker has had her porch rebuilt. Is there anything that you can do to help the residents, those residents in particular, because they are the most affected? And also, can I just clarify, is the house that's behind number 35, if I can have a look at that, does that have a window or windows on the one that goes towards Mr. Wright's property? So that's Mr. Wright's house, the back of his house, and there is a house that's there. Does that have windows on that gable end?
Sorry, I can't see the plan, but I'm assuming the one you mean on the corner.
It's that one there, near the access road, right?
Yeah, the one right on the bend.
Yeah, right on the access road, yeah.
Yes, it does have windows.
Is there any chance that it can be turned round?
I think...
Could I ask the head of planning to make a comment, please?
Let Mr Taylor answer first.
Thank you. All the properties on that line at the north of the site all have aspects to the front and the back, given that the separation distances are sufficient to allow for that. So there's approximately 21 metres between rear to rear across that whole length, and that would be the deemed appropriate standard across all our developments and what we baseline things on. It's shown, if I come out of this, that is shown on the cross section that was provided. Obviously these are just to give you an inclination, but it's there. That's the general. You can't zoom in any further. Sorry, that's the best I can do. That's showing the separation distances, so you can see there that at that point it's 24, but approximately it doesn't get less than 21 as it states in the report. And obviously there's a significant separation from the rear boundaries as well. So it's not just the rear to rear that's been considered, it's also the rear to the rear of the proposed houses to the boundary lines in terms of fences of the neighbours as well. So it doesn't impact the amenity to a point where we can recommend refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you said that you've done quite a lengthy consultation with the residents, and I'm just wondering, can you tell me what came back from that and actually what you have done to sort of waylay people's concerns?
I obviously don't have a full copy of all the comments, but a lot of the comments are consistent with what has actually been reported in the committee report, where there were concerns. The majority of the concerns were to do with traffic movements on the site, coming onto the site, of which, if I'm being completely honest, I couldn't answer it more thoroughly than the highway officer.
Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask the agent, I am a bit concerned about the SBI and how close. I know officer mentioned it's 10 metres, but in terms of construction, if it does obviously pass and construction takes place, etc., I am worried that obviously vehicles coming in and out, they may damage some of the SBI land. Can you just clarify exactly how you'd minimise that or completely remove that element from it being disturbed, if that makes sense?
Again, actually, there is a planning condition that's very detailed that means that we have to put a strategy forward as to how that would be dealt with. The buffer, to be honest, is a great help because it does mean that we won't have any activity in that area. It will, at the minimum, it will have to be fenced off, and we will look at different methods to contain anything to do with water runoff and such like, so that it runs away from the SBI site. But we do have a condition that requires a detailed strategy. It must be submitted to the council. It will have to be assessed, and that has to be done prior to commencement, I believe, Matthew. So therefore, it's protecting that is obviously a priority.
Just to aid the councillors, it's condition number 15 noted on the late list.
Right, okay. Can I just come back on that, if I may? So, in terms of the fencing you mentioned, will that be within the buffer zone and not on the land of the SBI?
To be honest, I'd have to check that, but I would, given that the 10 metre is a buffer zone and a no construction zone, and in actual fact, we exceed the 10 metres in most locations, we would look to maintain that 10 metre standoff.
Is there any further?
I've just got a further question on that. You talk about a 10-metre buffer zone. Is that as far as you go? Or, I mean, I'm not sure on this site if you could move it further away or not. Or is that just a right, well, we're 10 metres away, this is where we start building. Is it possible to move it further away, or is that not a consideration during your assessment of the plot?
Through a very extensive consultation process with Greater Manchester Ecological Unit, they felt that 10 metres was appropriate. I don't know how well you can see that plan, but there are quite a few occasions where we exceed the 10 metres. So we haven't rigidly just drawn a line. We've actually come typically, certainly along the south where it's felt to be a bit more sensitive, we're typically 13 metres away from that. So 10 metres was the absolute minimum. We haven't slavishly followed it. We've used that as a minimum and in many places exceeded it.
Right, thanks very much indeed. If we could now go to the Ward Councillor's contribution, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. This evening I would like to talk about 4 issues that are of concern to my colleagues and I. Other protected open land, OPAL, the proposed junction between number 33 and 35 Denbigh Drive, the existing pressures on existing infrastructure, and the land near to the development. It's not a secret that my party stands from the very beginning as to protect Opal and the Greenbelt. So here we have the opportunity to put those words into action. So I'll make no apologies for talking about it here. Government housing targets contributed to other applications in Oldham, such as Haven Lane and Knowles Lane, Opal sites being approved, thus snowballing other sites at Cowlishaw and Denbigh Drive. Other Opal sites in Oldham have been saved, and I respectfully ask the Planning Committee save this site too. The proposed junction between number 33 and 35, and if you could get the picture up that would be really helpful, so I can better explain to committee the issue. Thank you. The proposed access is between 2 homes, numbers 33 and 35, on an estate described by some as a rabbit warren. The road is so narrow, I cannot see how it can service a new estate adequately. At present, it's an extremely busy estate where residents cry out for a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit to reduce antisocial behaviour caused by speeding, added with the double parking all over the estate. I've just come away from a meeting with partners where we discussed problematic parking and traffic issues at Crompton House, just at the entrance to this estate, which every resident who is watching the meeting live can relate to. Around the corner is Crompton Primary School, another bottleneck at peak times, and the irony is, if anybody purchases one of these properties, according to a report from Oldham Council officers, there isn't any primary school places for them. So can you see why residents raise traffic on the estate as an issue? Time and time again, residents raise with me their concerns about pressures on existing highway, leisure facilities, school placement and doctor's surgeries, although I am pleased by the news at the recent announcement that it looks like we are getting a new health centre. The proposal adds to these existing pressures. The land near to the development, the report from United Utilities and the Environment Agency recommend approval with some conditions. However, if it was up to me, I'd be asking for a deferral, because I'm not convinced anybody has actually been out to Denbigh Drive to see for themselves, to see the drainage issues, and they certainly haven't spoke to the residents most directly affected to reassure them that the proposed scheme will not have any future issues, but will actually improve the situation. There is sewerage works. There is cattle that have been moved due to waterlogged field. Not only recent problems, but as you've heard from Mr. Ray, his home had to be rebuilt due to its collapse. And Mrs. Walker, who unfortunately can't be here today, but is listening, had to have a new porch fitted on her home where it collapsed. It is not only these homes that have suffered, but many up and down Denbigh Drive. Please defer this application, at the very least, to give the Environment Agency time to talk to Mr Ray, who has spoke to you tonight about the issues that he's already raised to do with drainage, who would be only too happy to share with them his and others' lived experiences. You need this information so you can make an informed decision. It would be remiss of me not to talk about the wildlife and how the application affects them. Residents show me images of badgers on the phones and through pictures, and the deer who are regular visitors to this area. So someone should be speaking for them too. This application is a prime example of everything that is wrong. 2 weeks before Christmas Day 2020, Miller Homes decided to give residents an early Christmas present of a proposal to build 52 properties. At the same time, they informed the local councillors. With this proposal, a very narrow access road between 33 and 35, and then in Easter, submit the application. It just fuels the conspiracy theories. And residents feel that they've not been listened to by the planning department or the developers, as there are so many issues with the site that don't just relate to access. People feel this is a done deal, and in fact it feels like it's already been reported in the press, that it has been approved. Please give residents the reassurances that they've been fully listened to, and there's no such thing as a done deal or a tick box exercise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Has anybody got any questions of Councillor Murphy? Councillor Gloucester?
Thank you, Chair. You talk about deferral, but you also talk about refusal, and I'm just not quite sure what the ultimate aim is, to be fair, from what you've said.
Yeah, thanks. For me, if I were in your shoes, I'd be killing this application. The officer outlined at the very beginning a policy so the needs don't outweigh the sort of outcome. The officer might be able to give the proper wording, but I feel that there is a detrimental impact. So for me, it'd be kicking it out for the Opal, if nothing else. And I've certainly got concerns over the access. I'd be deferring it for the drainage issues, but I'm also convinced in the report, I think one of the officers mentioned this about a construction and how the applicant must conform to that as well. But I don't see anything about vehicle movements on site, the hours of use. So what stops a builder going on at 7 o'clock in the morning and starting work? What stops them starting on a Sunday? What stops them on a bank holiday? I've not seen anything in the report to satisfy the hours of construction, so that, you know, at least residents are reassured that the hours of construction will be, say, between, I don't know, 10 till 4. So they finish at 4. That allows residents to get home and construction sites off the existing highway, and give residents that respite during hours of construction. So there's quite a lot of reasons for kicking it out. For me, it's the Opal policy, if anything else. And I don't believe that this application outweighs the need to build on Opal. And then, if anything, for the deferral is for the drainage issues, because I think there's so much work to be done. And I keep going on about this. We as a council do not want to be picking up the tab when Miller Homes has disappeared onto the next application. I think getting an application right is far more important than getting it put forward in any given timescales. These residents have to live with the decision that this planning committee is making tonight. So I think belts and braces, and it just feels that Miller Homes have worked with the council, fantastic, but I don't feel they've worked enough with the residents at all. I don't feel that some of their needs have been catered for, and I'm just scared to death that the people who are living there have to live with all the concerns that we as a committee, well, I said we, you as a committee are about to approve, and I beg you not to.
Councillor Williamson.
You mentioned about the infrastructure. Now, I know we were talking about the health centre, but there's loads of other stuff. You know, it's the road network from there, and then also the road network from Cowleyshire, which we know will not meet, I don't think, in my opinion, won't meet the requirements of that site for 201 homes. So you mentioned about infrastructure. What do you think is needed, and how can we address that for the primary schools, secondary schools, health centres, leisure facilities, everything that we've got elsewhere already, but we don't appear to be having in Shore and Crompton? We've got to meet those requirements somehow with the GP. So how do you think that we are going to be able? Do you think we are going to be able to meet that infrastructure, what we need?
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that one, to be fair, but I'm glad you raised it. For me, Shore and Crompton, right in Shore and Crompton, because people forget that the postal area of Royton is actually Crompton. So when I speak about Crompton, I obviously mean elements of what people class themselves as Royton. So it just feels that Royton, Shore and Crompton seem to be getting more than their fair share of planning applications approved. So when we talk about pressures on the highway infrastructure, for me it'd be about spreading the love. Spreading it about so the highway network is not top heavy in one particular area. So we've got 200 properties on Cowleyshire, we've got another 42 here, and a proposal I hear in the pipeline of some in the town centre on the existing Littlewood site for 400. You can sort of see where I'm going when it comes to highway pressures, leisure facilities and school placements.
Is there any further questions of Councillor Murphy? Councillor Gloucester.
Has anybody looked at this sewer issue that you're aware of? Because it's really bothering me, this now, because you talk about the wildlife and all the rest of it. But if there is sewerage, I just want to know if anybody's actually taken the time to look at it, to be honest.
I can't answer that question. Mr. Ray might be in a better position to answer it if the chair will allow a degree of leniency. There is concern of drainage down there. There really is. It's the sewerage, it's the cattle. It does feel too much water in that area. So further investigation by United Utilities or the Environment Agency to make sure that this proposal, firstly, isn't going to make things worse, as the officers have mentioned already, but is actually going to make things better, because we have got issues down there. So a deferral makes sense, because they need to satisfy the committee that all the boxes have been ticked for your satisfaction, not for Miller Holmes' satisfaction. And certainly not, they need to be satisfying the residents and providing them with reassurances.
I think that the officer has already explained that, of course, the drainage has already been worked out with United Utilities, but possibly you could again go over the drainage system that obviously is an agreed position with United Utilities, who are the providers.
So as the head of planning advised earlier, that we can't seek a betterment of an existing situation, but we can seek to not have an impact by virtue of this development. The appropriate qualified individuals and consultees, both in the council and outside the council, i.e. the drainage section within the council, and United Utilities, who maintain and own the infrastructure in terms of the sewerage, have considered the schemes and haven't raised an objection. I appreciate the concerns, and given that there are concerns, that's why those consultations have made sure to be done and made sure that there aren't objections to the scheme whilst bringing it forward with a positive recommendation to this committee. Given that there is no basis as an officer to make a recommendation to this committee, either to refuse or defer the application, the information before us from the appropriate qualified people, both from Miller Homes and our own consultees, as stated previously, note that the drainage schemes are acceptable. So I can only state that to you as the committee, and you have to make a decision on the basis of what you hear and read within the text and the supporting information submitted.
And just to add to what Mr Taylor's saying, just to, in an attempt to draw a line under this matter, shall we say, there is no, in my opinion, there's no basis for deferring this application on the drainage information. As Mr Taylor's explained, that's been satisfied to the statutory consultees from that point of view. If members are concerned about the existing situation and any history of sewer flooding and what have you, I would suggest that they take it up with United Utilities themselves and investigate with them. It's not a matter for this committee.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? So if we actually said, when did those consultees visit the site to make their assessment, we would get a date and time back, would we?
I'm not sure I could answer that on behalf of those consultees. Obviously, they have lots of information to hand about the capacity of their sewers and United Utilities in terms of the drainage of the site and crucially what the proposals are in this development for how to deal with the water, the surface water in particular, that will be collected on this site. So that's what they focus on. In terms of the existing issues, as I say, as long as this development isn't making that worse, which is they're comfortable with, it's not for this development to be looked at, to look at that. And I think that's what I'm suggesting you take up with United Utilities, is to talk to them about the existing situation, because from an officer point of view, we're satisfied that the matter has been dealt with in relation to this development.
So when you say Miller Homes won't allow any surface water to go into that system, which is what you said earlier, yeah, how the hell do they manage that? Because that just blows my brains, I'm sorry.
I can't... Yeah, there's a condition, as we've already pointed out, to cover this, so they have to provide details of the plans to discharge that condition to the satisfaction of our drainage colleagues. But ultimately what we're talking about is what we call sustainable drainage systems. So when rain falls on a site like this, it will be collected in, for example, it could be a pond, or it could be, I think in this case it is a pond, but there can be various different mechanisms, different sites. And then it is allowed to discharge from that pond in a natural way, as it does do now, to mimic what it does now, and not to the sewer. Because that's what we're trying to avoid. That's what United Utilities don't want to happen either. They don't want surface water going into their sewer unless absolutely there's no other option. But in this case, there is another option, and we're satisfied with the drainage proposals subject to the condition.
So we're absolutely sure that this pond that is going in is not going to overflow and flood the new Cowlishaw development down the hill, yeah?
Well, our in the application for the discharge of condition, that's the kind of thing that our drainage consultants will double check and make sure So that's why there's a condition on the permission that the detail can be ironed out later on.
Okay, we're now going into the debate on the particular application. Has anybody got any comments? Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you. Well, I have every sympathy with the objectors and I can understand why they feel like they do. But I feel I'm going to become Alan Evans here and say that we actually have to have evidence to justify going against officer recommendation. And sadly, all the consultees are saying they're satisfied. Opal obviously is a considerable issue, but clearly it's been superseded. It's an old policy, it doesn't meet modern standards, and it's superseded again by the NPPF, and I reiterate that that does seem to be a developer's charter, sadly. We very much share the concerns about supporting infrastructure, but as of this moment, the planning system doesn't allow us to require supporting infrastructure, which is a terrible disadvantage, but that's the world we live in. So I can sit and sadly I have to conclude that Mr Evans will be telling us now not to go against officer recommendation because we don't have evidence to justify doing that. And I think that's the case, and I say I share the concerns, but I don't think we could justify refusal.
Have we got any further contributions people would like to make? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'll probably get told off by the head of planning for this, but once again, I'll go back to what I've said at previous meetings, that I think we've got to look at the objections that come in, and the objections is plentiful in this. The parish council's objected to it, and we've got to. I know you're going to tell me off, but as a committee, at some point, we've got to stand up and fight for the residents. I wouldn't like to be getting that next to my house. I wouldn't like to be living on Denbigh Drive with all the traffic and the construction work that's going on. So, for me, I'm thinking of the residents. I'm thinking that there's no way that I'd want to support this application. And just, I know it was probably said the wrong way, but Councillor Murphy, just for the sake of seeing a badger on a phone, that's got to be something that's worth saving the place for. But I have issues with the SIB. I have issues with the access. I think that there's many issues with that I wouldn't like to be in the resident's position putting up with that. And I think we've got to be able to find some way of sticking up for the residents on some proposal at least, because as I've said before, if we don't, we might as well not turn up as a committee. We might as well let the officers do the work and we'll just tick it on. We've got again? Yeah, we've got to do something for the residents. As I say, I certainly can't support this.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Councillor Lancaster.
Recommend for refusal.
Second that.
Mr Chairman, I was just going to say that unfortunately Councillor Woodvine and myself are going to have to excuse ourselves from the meeting due to parking limitations elsewhere in the town centre. So our apologies for that.
So you're not going to vote?
We can vote if this application's wrapping up, but it depends on if further contributions want to be made, I suppose. Don't want to get a fine, I'm afraid.
Just, as I understood it, Councillor Williamson has moved that we refuse the application, and it's seconded by Councillor Halbin. Is there any...
Can I ask the planning grounds for that recommendation, please?
I was going to come to that, yeah. Could you give me the grounds for refusal, please?
Access and Opal. And Surrey.
Right. I will ask the officer's advice of the nature of those.
Can I just ask a question? It is related to the Opal, because I just don't get this, right? We've submitted this Places for Everyone plan. It's been submitted to who and who approves it? So how can we make a decision on a plan that hasn't yet been approved, but it doesn't matter about the plan that's out of date because that that doesn't matter because the new one's here, but the new one isn't here. It's not being, well, I don't even know the word, I can't get the word out, but it's not being approved. We have not approved that plan. And I don't understand how we can make a decision against a plan that doesn't exist and then one that's not actually been approved.
We don't suspend everything because things haven't been approved, but my understanding, and I'll ask Peter to explain it further, is that it's now submitted as a plan, and we, as an authority, as a planning authority, have to work towards what is there in front of us.
Okay, so first of all, I haven't said we throw out the existing plan. We've acknowledged that that is the existing development plan, and Opal is part of that. So that is why this is a departure from the adopted development plan. As we've talked about before, if there are material considerations that counter that departure, as in that benefits, pros of the development, if you like, they can weigh against that departure, and hence we come to the conclusion that we do. In terms of places for everyone and this site being allocated within it, now that the places for everyone has been submitted to the Secretary of State for examination, it gains a certain amount of weight, and so it can become a material consideration. As you say, it's not adopted yet, but it can be a material consideration. And as I did earlier, from the point of view of this council, we have to acknowledge that this council did agree and approve places for everyone for submission. So in effect, we have said that is the plan that we want to have for places for everyone. So we have said we want that plan, and it includes this site. So that's just a factor to consider. But it is one of the material considerations, therefore, as is the 5-year supply position, as is the relative sustainability merits of the site, and often ensuring that things, as we've talked about, highways, drainage, and so forth, are satisfactory. So it's about that planning balance again. So there is the Opal counting against the development, but there are various other considerations that, depending on how we consider them, can outweigh that harm. If I may as well, Chair, just in terms of going to the reasons for refusal that have been proposed, as I noted down, it was access, Opal, and sewerage. Aside from Opal, which, as we've pointed out, is it's a departure from the development plan, this application against Opal. The access and the sewerage, I have to say very clearly, we feel as officers those matters have been satisfactorily dealt with in this application, and so we would have great concern about those as reasons for refusal for this application.
The actual buildings aren't anything like in character with the local areas, or are they?
Could you pull the I think in the sections, yeah. Okay, well, if I may, Chair.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, well, from that point of view, thank you for clarifying that. Again, what we seek is a mixture of housing in all areas. So, it wouldn't necessarily be a positive thing if it was more bungalows. As you say, there are already plenty of bungalows in this area. So it's about having the right mix of housing in any given area to meet the needs of the community. And in terms of the design, I wouldn't say it's particularly out of keeping.
Okay, I think members have been advised that they don't think the refusal would be substantiated or stand up to appeal, but it's up to members, and it has been moved and seconded. So I will take... Sorry?
I mean, I don't know if you want me to remind... I don't know if you want to... So you heard what I said earlier, the same position still applies. In the event of a refusal, and if it does go to appeal, you would be required to provide evidence to substantiate those reasons, and if you don't, there's a risk of costs being awarded against the council.
Okay, so if we move to the vote, those in favour of refusal, please show. So that's 3. Those against refusal, please show. So refusal is lost. I will formally move that we approve the application. Is that seconded? Seconded. All those in favour of approval, please show. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. So the application's approved. Can move on to the final application of this evening, which is 1A Lloyd Tunstead, which is a regular visitor to the committee. I'll ask the officers to present this, and this isn't a planning application, this is a list. This is for listed building consent.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just do a brief introduction then. So yes, this is item 9. So it relates to development at 1A Lower Tunstead on Tunstead Lane in Greenfield. And the proposal is for a single and 2-storey rear extensions to the building, which is a dwelling. So this is a listed building consent application, not a planning application. So it's just really important that I start with that. And it has been referred to committee, again, as you've alluded to, because the applicant is related to an elected member of the council, which is Councillor Graham Sheldon. So, as you've said, Chair, the application has, well, similar applications have been brought to committee before, and that's set out in the history section of the report. And it's been refused essentially on heritage grounds, in that the less than substantial harm being caused by the previous proposals has not been clearly outweighed by public benefits, which is the essential test that's set out through our policy 24, which is our historic environment policy, but particularly the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. That is the key test. So all of those applications, the previous ones, have been to appeal. The first 2, which would be the original planning application and the associated list of building consent, have been dismissed at appeal. So in short, the inspector has supported the council's decision. The 2 applications that followed that, which have also been to committee, they are the subject of a current ongoing appeal, so we haven't got the outcome of that at the moment. So this revised application for list of building consent on its own here, not a planning application as well. Essentially, it's been a redesigned scheme, but essentially the changes, which are quite limited, but they are set out in the report of what they are, but they do include a glazed link, but some of the changes have resulted in other harm caused to the historic value of the building, which is essentially what the key issue is for consideration here. And in short, we don't think the reasons given for refusal previously have been overcome by this redesign. So it is on that basis the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you. Has any members got any questions for the officers? Councillor Denbigh.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, this has come several times in various forms. But my advice to the applicant, and I think I might have even said it, I don't know, previously, would be to work with the council officers and try and get a plan in place that you can agree on. Can you let us know whether that's happened?
There's certainly been conversations about the scheme. The exact details of those I'm not sure, but what's is a material consideration in this case, I suppose, is the fact that we now have a dedicated conservation officer within our team that we didn't have with the previous applications, and they supported the conclusions essentially of the previous applications, and that is in agreement that the current application is also recommended for refusal. So, you know, as Matthew was pointing out with previous applications that have been heard tonight, we do have a requirement, a statutory requirement to be proactive, work with applicants to find solutions. In this case, we've not been able to find a solution that addresses the issue. So we naturally end up with another recommendation for refusal.
Has anybody else got any questions at all? Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, can you just remind me what the issue is? I know we've seen it a few times, but I've lost track.
Certainly, yes. So when we're looking at, bearing in mind this is a listed building consent, not a planning application, we're looking essentially at the impact on the listed building caused by the proposed extensions. So in the simplest way to look at it, some developments have no harm, some have limited harm, which are designated as being less than substantial harm for the national planning policy purposes, and then the next step up from that is substantial harm. So in order to, what we're saying here is that the proposals result in less than substantial harm. Less than, yes. So that is the phrasing in the national planning policy framework. The only way that that scheme can therefore be approved is if there are public benefits that outweigh the extent of that harm. And given we have, for slightly different schemes, appeal decisions that have supported the council's previous decisions to refuse these applications, that in itself is a material consideration as well that bolsters our thought process, if you like, the justification for the recommendation.
When you say less than substantial harm, that to me sounds okay. I don't understand the wording of why we're sort of saying it's not okay, because less than substantial harm to me sounds good. Yeah?
It would be okay if there were public benefits that outweighed that harm, and that's where it fails the application. There isn't any public benefits that outweigh that harm. So essentially, it's you can compare it like a set of scales where you're stacking up harm and then looking at benefits, but the harm has to be clearly outweighed.
So the public benefit couldn't be that it can now house a larger family. That's not a consideration, is it? I take it. It's just, what do you mean by public benefit?
That's the key. That's the test for the applicant to put forward, that there is public benefit that outweighs the harm. So there would be benefits to the applicant in having a larger home, but that's not necessarily transpire into having significant weight as a public benefit. So it's, and the harm, yeah, and the harm is to the historic fabric of the building for the reasons set out in the report.
Councillor Robin.
Yeah, I was just trying to get my head around this public benefit. Where would you get public benefit from anywhere on a private house? I don't understand that, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes, well, I know it does. On a case-by-case basis, there may be extensions proposed to dwellings that are listed buildings where the harm may be much lesser, or affects more recent additions to the house rather than original fabric, as we call it. So we've weighed up the harm, we've weighed up the benefits, and we feel that the benefits do not outweigh the harm. That's the essential justification for the recommendation that's made.
But I think just to also add, if I may, Chair, you know, bearing in mind listed building consents aren't just about dwellings. They can be for any listed building. So in terms of that case about public benefits, there are instances where this committee has approved modifications to a listed building because the public benefit of what will be able to go into that building or be used for outweigh that harm. But the starting point should always be with a listed building. We don't really want to harm that historic fabric. So any harm is bad. It's a question then of how significant the benefit is and does it outweigh that harm. And as we've said, in terms of this particular situation, there isn't any great public benefit, so it doesn't outweigh the harm.
An example being Failsworth Town Hall, seeing as you know, that was a listed building, but the extension at the back added substantial benefit and didn't detract. Anyway, I'm not going into debate about that.
Well, that's a public building. That's what I don't understand about this public benefit. A private build, Failsworth Town Hall is a public building, so I understand the public benefit. And a private dwelling, there's going to be no public benefit, is it?
I think we've been here a number of times that this development, it's actually lost on appeal as well, and currently it's at appeal since his last decision, I think, which was, I don't know, sometime last year. So I at this stage would, and this isn't a planning application, this is just listed building consent that's being applied for. So at this stage I think that I would move that we actually refuse this application. Sorry, Councillor Surgeon, did you?
Yeah, I was going to just move to refuse it as well. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So you're seconding it? Yeah, thank you. All those in favour of refusal, please show. Those against? Okay, thank you. That concludes the business of this evening, and thanks for your patience.
I think the head of licensing expected me to put my hand up then.